Every map has an empty space, a corner where the lines don't make sense. For Vermont, it's the Bennington Triangle, a few square miles of high, unforgiving wilderness where the trees grow too close together and the fog never quite lifts. The mountain has always been quiet, too quiet. Even the indigenous people refused to build camp there. They called it cursed ground. They had a name for it that translates roughly to the place that swallows. They wouldn't even speak it after dark, a place where the four winds met and souls went to vanish. The elders would tell their children, if you hear the mountain calling your name, don't answer, because it's not really calling you home. The clock started ticking in 1945. 5 people, gone, without trace, all within 5 years. And before you assume you know this story, you don't. Because what the newspapers didn't print is somehow worse than what they did. The official record struggled to contain the facts, but the terror lies in the details, in what was found, and more importantly, what wasn't. And it began simply. Middie Rivers, 74 years old, a lifelong hunter, guide and trapper who'd spent decades in these woods. Not just any woods, these specific mountains, these particular trails. He knew the trails better than the back of his own weathered hands. He knew the dangers. He knew the shifts in the weather and the hidden drops in the terrain. He knew where the deer bedded down and where the streams ran dry in autumn. One November afternoon, 1945, he set out to hunt with a group of 4 other men. Experienced hunters, every one of them. They were tracking deer along a familiar ridge. Middie was leading. He moved ahead of the group, maybe 30, 40 yards, following fresh tracks. They saw him duck under a low branch. They looked down to check their own footing for just a moment. When they looked up, Middie was gone. They called out, nothing. They ran to where they'd last seen him. The tracks he'd been following were still there, clear in the frost. But Middie's tracks, they just stopped, mid-trail, like he'd been erased. Search parties were immediate and thorough. They followed the path he was last seen on. They checked every natural hiding place, every cave, every depression in the earth. They walked the perimeter repeatedly. His companions retraced every step a dozen times, their voices growing hoarse from shouting his name into the indifferent wilderness. But the mountain didn't leave a single clue. They found his rifle 3 days later, still loaded, propped against a tree like he'd set it down to tie his boot. But Middie, gone. Not a snag piece of fabric caught on bark. Not a footprint leading away from the dense woods. No sign of struggle. No evidence of an animal encounter. No blood, no body, just absolute silence where a man should have been. The search went on for weeks. Locals who'd known Middie for decades couldn't understand it. This wasn't some tourist who'd wandered off a marked trail. This was a man who could navigate these mountains blindfolded. They finally called off the search as winter closed in. It was logged as a tragic accident. A hunter lost to the cold. The kind of mundane horror the woods sometimes claim. His family held a funeral with an empty casket. Remember that detail about his experience. It matters. Because what took Middie could have been nature. Old man, harsh winter, tragic but explainable. What happened next proved something else was hunting. The silence didn't last. The mountain waited just over a year, and it chose someone younger, someone who didn't belong in the cold, hard law of the woods, someone who had no business vanishing. Paula Welden, 18 years old, a bright, ambitious sophomore from Bennington College. December 1st, 1946. A crisp Sunday afternoon. She told her roommate she was going for a walk on the long trail, a known, popular, well-marked path that thousands of people hiked every year without incident. She was wearing a red parka, bright, impossible to miss against the grey-brown winter landscape. She left her wallet and possessions behind. She told her roommate she'd be back for dinner. She was seen by multiple witnesses that afternoon. A couple passed her on the trail. An older man returning from his own hike waved to her. She was seen by a group of other hikers just a few hundred yards from the trailhead. They remembered her clearly, alone, walking with purpose, heading north toward Glastonbury Mountain. They waved. She waved back, that red parka bright as a warning flare. And then, as the trail curved around the base of the mountain, she simply stepped out of frame. One hiker swears the forest went completely silent the moment she disappeared. No birds, no wind, no rustling leaves, like the mountain was holding its breath. He said it felt wrong, like the air pressure had changed. This time, the disappearance was public. A young woman, a college student. It dominated the headlines across New England. The search for Paula Jean was massive, the largest in Vermont history. The state police, the FBI, hundreds of volunteers from 4 surrounding states descended on Glastonbury Mountain. They employed psychics. They hired experienced trackers. They brought in search dogs that wandered in circles, whining, refusing to follow any scent. They put up reward money that would bankrupt a small town. They searched for months. They found nothing. Her footprints in the frost simply ended, mid-stride, right there on the trail, as if she'd been plucked into the sky by something watching from above. No note, no hidden shelter, no torn fabric, no bloodstain, no answer. It was as if she had been dissolved by the very air of the mountain. That red parka, so bright, so impossible to miss, was never seen again. The world poured its fear and focus onto the Bennington Triangle. News reporters camped at the base of the mountain. Theories multiplied: murder, kidnapping, amnesia, wild animals, suicide. None of them fit the evidence, because there was no evidence. But the mountain had already proven its power. It took her. And if you think this is where it ends, you should probably leave now, because it gets stranger, stranger and closer, closer to impossible. She had simply stepped over a line invisible to everyone but the mountain, a boundary that doesn't appear on any map. And in the next 3 years, it would open its mouth 3 more times, each disappearance more impossible than the last. Each victim following the same pattern, seen one moment, gone the next, vanished so completely, it was as if they'd never existed at all.